Morning, we'll call this morning's meeting to order, and the first thing on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
I got a motion by Kevin, second by Jenny to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Citizens to be heard, do we have anybody that's called in? No one's called in, and everybody here is employed. Okay. Next thing is approval of the payment of the bills and vouchers.
Move approval. Second.
We got a motion by Jim, second by,
I would just ask, I know that you grabbed it, is there any waiting on?
Oh.
I did ask Wayne to look into.
Okay.
Maybe if we could include Jenny's voucher.
vouchers, okay? And the payment. Okay, I take that's with your approval.
That's
Jim.
fine, yes.
Okay, Jim and Jenny on the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes from May 19th. Need approval of them.
Move approval.
Second.
Got a motion by Kevin, second by Jenny to approve the minutes of May 19th. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, with that, we'll go into our weekly update with Kathy McKay and her staff. Unless Jamie and Cheryl coming up, or update on COVID-19.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I handed out our trends of cases just in the last weeks, and as you see, our cases continue to increase, which we expect. That's not alarming to us because we continue to do testing, so we're going to see more additional cases. What we really look at is number of deaths, which is unfortunate. We see a few additional deaths, and every death is important, so we don't want to make light of the low numbers, but we have 29 deaths as of June 1st. Also, we're looking at, as I look at the Minnesota, we look at hospitalizations and deaths in Minnesota and of course in our metro area. And in Minnesota, ICU beds are a little over 1,000 used for COVID cases. Their capacity is 1,257. Now, this is across the state of Minnesota, so it's all hospitals. And they can ramp up about 700 more within 24 hours. So we aren't at capacity there for ICU beds. Ventilators, there's 597 that are on ventilators for COVID. And the capacity across the state of Minnesota is 1,433. So we're well below those numbers on ventilators. Sanford has about 20 to 30 ICU beds with an ability to ramp up more than that, but about a third of those as of last week were used for COVID. So the numbers aren't ramping up for them. They're able to manage that with just the beds they have. And Essentia had just 3 ICU beds used for COVID. So those numbers, they're not seeing huge ramps for those. So that's the good news. So we watch that. We meet with Sanford and Essentia remotely every week just to discuss cases and what's happening in our community, as well as the other healthcare officials. Family Healthcare has a downtown testing site. I think I mentioned it last week, and they continued that this week. They expanded it one more week. And that testing site is for those populations that use family health care. It's also for vulnerable populations, so anyone that's experiencing homelessness. So we did have a few, we assisted them with transporting clients that had no means to get over there and trying not to have them use the public buses. So we transported a number of patients or a number of clients over there. I can't remember the number of how many there were, but we did a number of clients. A person from my staff did the transporting. So we were able to get some more testing done for some of the homeless population. So that was good. Let's see, any questions on the cases or the chart? Sanford and Essentia are still doing their drive-through testing as well, and those are those have to go through their healthcare system. So it's not an open mass drive-through. They check with their healthcare provider or the nurse, call nurse to see if they meet the requirements. It's those that are symptomatic and those that think they had a contact with a positive case. So they screen those through the healthcare providers, and then they can do those drive-through testing at Sanford and Essentia. We don't have any mass testing in those two areas.
I have a question. Are any of the patients currently at Sanford or Essentia in the metro here on ventilators?
You know, we don't have that information, and they weren't able to give us that.
Okay.
We requested it, but they're not able to give us
All
that
right.
information, so.
Thank you.
Kathy, can you explain to me why we don't have the data for no longer needing isolation?
They're just slow in getting that information to us.
So they're still tracking that?
They're still tracking that, right,
just not
right.
available.
Yep, it's just not been available. They're a little slow in getting that documented. And then I handed out, sometimes we get questions about the symptoms, and so I handed out the very colorful sheet. Is it COVID or is it other things? So it can, there's COVID, and then there's the flu or influenza, and then there's your just a basic cold symptoms, and then allergies. So you can see, cough and fever are mainly what you see with COVID. It's the same with the flu, and not so much with colds and allergies. I've had questions about, I have a runny nose and sneezing, should I be worried? Well, as you can see, that's rarely a symptom with COVID. And it's often a symptom with allergies or cold. So much of the respiratory stuff is going on, and people get concerned right away. I must have COVID-19. And so some of the symptoms are clearly the cough and fever are the two primary, but you can get the body aches, headache, fatigue, sore throat, loss of taste and smell. And sometimes those happens, but the primary is the cough and fever. So at least it distinguishes a little bit between, we can provide information to people whether it's really just an allergy or a cold. So that just kind of gives you a little snapshot of that information.
I saw you got about 13 different things listed there. You could put another column on there, old age, and it would cover all of them, too.
We'll add that.
I was just wondering, what are you supposed to have, one of them or two of them? Are you concerned about,
Well-
how many should you have before you get concerned about this? When you talk shortness of breath, well, okay, I got that, headache, daily, whatever. But, how many of these you need? Or
They initially put out cough and fever and two of the other symptoms, but then they eliminated the two of the other symptoms. So, the big thing is if you have a fever, that's primary.
Okay.
And then if you have any respiratory, the cough, the shortness of breath, sore throat, we've heard of that a lot. Lost in taste and smell, sometimes that's part of that symptom. So, it can mimic others, as you can see. So we really, sometimes the fever is the primary, where stay home and let's just see if you have reduced the fever, because not every fever means you have COVID either. So it's a challenge. There's other screening questions, but we really primarily look at cough and fever for people to stay out of work.
I got one more. Kathy, did you see that Catalyst Medical in Fargo is offering antibody testing?
I did see
To the
that.
public,
I haven't contacted them to see what that entails, but I did read about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll turn it over to Cheryl and then Jamie to provide more information on things that we're doing.
Good morning. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically the testing with long-term care and assisted living. At last week's board meeting, Kathy had mentioned that had begun with coordination between the National Guard and Minnesota Department of Health. So that started on May 17th. We right now have 3 facilities that are have undergone their 3 rounds of testing. So they do a baseline, and then a week later the second round, and then a week later the third round. So we have more testing that's taking place this week. We have 3 more facilities that are being done this week. Part of my role it has been to serve as a liaison for local public health between the Minnesota Department of Health, the National Guard, and also the facility, which usually entails that I'm doing frequent communication with the facility, finding out what the needs are of the National Guard to try and provide a smooth event for their testing of residents and staff. And so far that has gone quite well. They have, Minnesota Department of Health has set up couriers to pick up the samples. Some of those samples have been going to the Mayo Lab. So the courier drops off a container because the samples need to be placed on ice and kept that way, and then they pick them up after the event to transport them to Mayo Clinic. Also wanted to mention that beginning this past week, last Tuesday I believe, is there are 3 static sites over on the North Dakota side in Fargo and West Fargo. That is coordination between the North Dakota Department of Health, National Guard, and then Fargo Cass Public Health. And they set that up to basically do businesses on their side if there are businesses that have employees that need to be tested. For us, they're allowing us to send over staff people from some of our healthcare facilities, our adult corporate foster care units, and they basically complete a form where they can pick a 2-hour time slot on a particular day of the week so that they can go over there, and then there isn't a line for them to stand in. These sites over on the North Dakota side are not for mass testing. They are for specific criteria. So that allows another option for people on this side of the river that are healthcare workers in a facility, or if there are businesses that wanted to participate as well, that they have another option for testing.
What was the results from last weekend's testing? Did we get any results from that?
There was 9 positive out of, I think there was 810 that were tested. So very low positive rate.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
And Jamie.
Good morning. I
Morning,
just want to
Jane.
take a minute to tell you about an opportunity we had last week to work with the nonprofit leaders in our community to provide some educational resources to the non-English speaking community members. And so as a part of the regular task force that we have been participating in virtually each week, we have a subgroup that is focusing on unified messaging and utilizing local leaders in order to get the messaging to the community that we need in all ways. But we were contacted by the Afro-American Development Association, and they had received a grant from Concordia, and so the grant was allowing them to do some video messaging. Our non-English speaking citizens in the community often will use the internet and local leaders to get the information they need, but the challenge in any disaster is to get what's going on locally. So we were excited, they reached out to us. There was a Somali TV that came out from Minneapolis, and we provided a video. Cheryl was the star of the video, and we were able to tell them what's going on in the community locally. And so the information we shared was about how things are being done in Minnesota for testing, the contact investigation, the contact tracing, and also just to repeat the information of the hygiene and social distancing and wearing a mask. And so it was fun, and it was an exciting opportunity for us and a connection that we were able to make with this organization. Of course, the grant from Concordia helped them to provide the resources for the community, but also to get the Somali TV. So the recording will be actually translated into Somali, Sudanese, and Kurdish languages and broadcast. And so I want to also take a minute to thank Cocoon, Dabar, and Connie Adim, 2 leaders that we worked with last week on Thursday, and look forward to working with them in the future.
Okay,
Okay, any questions for us?
I'm okay. Anybody got anything? All right, thank you for the update then.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the budget update with Lori and Steve.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Last week, when we talked about our budget guideline or timeline for 2021, we shared that we had hoped to come back this week and provide an update on both the 2019 Statement of Revenues and Expenditures and fund balance changes, and also an update on the first, we talked about last week of doing it for the first quarter. Given the COVID crisis, we thought that we would take the budget as far as we could, so we took it up until the 27th of last week's for our revenues and expenses. So if we could, you have two packets before you. The first packet that we'll go through has the 2019 information in it. And historically, this board has asked us to look at revenues expenditures that are 110% or more from what our budgeted line item was. And so I'm just going to like to touch on a few different areas, provide some context to where we are. For our discussion today, the highlighted green areas are going to be our revenues, and the yellow highlighted areas are going to deal with our expenses. So on the first page, general revenues. In our section, the first area that I wanted to touch on was motor vehicle. It shows that we had revenues over expenditures of roughly 118%. If you recall last year, MNLARS provided additional funding to help compensate for some of the challenges that program has provided. And so that constitutes the increase there. In the next area is the treasure. That was at 749%. Again, the biggest adjustments that we had there were market value adjustments, and again, timing of our held investments and when those interest payments came. And so a lot of our payments came due during our interest payments came due during 19, and that was why that was such a large amount. The next portion is the county attorney. That was at 142%. If you recall, during budget planning last year, we were working with the city of Moorhead. We did not know if we were going to have any of the small cities for work for the following year. So a portion of that it does account for the fact that we did get some contracts for the small cities, and also a significant portion of that was for forfeitures that we received in funding for that. So county attorney, or excuse me, of grounds and building, that was at 356%. The big piece of that had to do with in 2018, we didn't receive our payment from the city for their custodian portion of their payment, and so it wasn't recognized in 2018, and so that became recognized in 2019. And also we had some bus barn revenue up by motor vehicle that wasn't originally in the budget. The next section is the law enforcement sheriff. That was 112%. Breaking that down, they received an additional $25,000 in police relief aid. They received an additional $16,000 in training from the state. And then we had some about $40,000 worth of civil fees that they received to make up that difference. The next and last area that I would touch before I turn it over for questions is dispatchers. We are at 116%. And we received, last year we received some additional payments from our small cities for the New World Order software, or New World software. And so that was reimbursed but was not put in the budget. And so those are the, I guess, the highlighted of the revenues in the general revenue. Does anybody have any additional questions in that section? So our total fund revenues, our budgeted revenues were $26,423,056. We ended up collecting $28,123,690, with a variance of revenues over expenditures of $1,700,634. Now, it should be noted that of that amount, about $400,000 had to do with the market value of our held investments. And also, this past year, Lori moved some of our reserve dollars into two separate banks that we received roughly $350,000 of a higher interest rate than what we're anticipating. And so that has impact of about $750,000 or $750,000 in our revenues last year.
So these revenues over that are gone over, do they stay in each individual's department's revenues, or do they go to general fund?
They go to the general fund balance.
So they start all over every year then?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Can you clarify why with the treasurer again, why it was 749%?
At the end of the year, we have to adjust the value of our investments by the market value. And sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. The last few years, it's actually been a loss for us. This year it was actually a $4,000 gain, but it's just paper. It's not actual money that has come in. So it's kind of like depreciation, where it's a book entry. It's not actual cash coming in.
Any other questions on revenues? If not, I'll move into expenditures. The first area is internal accounting. That was 111%, and maybe Lori can touch on this, but really just has more to do about the timing of payments in that portion. The next portion that touch on is grounds and buildings. Again, that's 115%. I think with the winter that we had, can be addressed for that additional costs. The next
Steve, is that also, was this the first year that we had paid for the taking over of the roads?
The parking lot in the streets also.
So that added to that too.
That's correct.
And I think, because I asked that question of Joel, and I think he's added and built that into future budgets to reflect that,
correct.
right?
Yep. See, the next portion, next area is the 911 fees, and again, that's money in, money out. Again, is more of a timing issue there. The juvenile detention isn't with our facilities, but this is the area that kind of covers some of the other out-of-home placements, medication issues, and so we were at 117% for 2019 in that area. We're certainly hoping that moving forward with the expansion of the juvenile center, that some of those funds will be, some of those placement dollars will be allocated to keep those kids here. Emergency management was at 169%. Again, that had to do with the flood. We are looking to, I don't know if we've received our FEMA reimbursements yet, but we'll be receiving some from reimbursements for that event. And then the last one is Metro Council. That was at 113%. If you recall, last year the board approved to provide a match for the bikeway gap analysis through Metro Cog. And then lastly, there is one more payment that we know that we're aware of that needs to come out of that $80,000 payment to the watershed. But overall, total revenues anticipated, total expenses of $27,073,056 is what we had anticipated. We had expenditures of $26,687,783. So we had potential savings of $385,272. So our department heads did a nice job of sticking to their budgets overall. Any questions with the general expenses? Okay. I'll move to the second page with Road and Bridge, Social Services, County Buildings. The main area that I guess I would touch on that might jump out at you is social service income maintenance. Again, I think that's an area that we've been, this board's heard a great deal about with the challenges that they're facing. And again, this is kind of a money in, money out situation for both the revenues and the expenditures were higher than what we had expected. The juvenile detention line, I think the area of interest has to do with the construction. We had, again, if you recall, when we moved forward with the expansion and construction of the juvenile center, Cass County provided $2.5 million towards that project. And we also had some additional interest from the bond dollars that we had prior to starting the project. And so that is where the impact is there. And otherwise, everything else seemed to be right around the area where we had anticipated. Are there any questions at all on the summaries for departments? If not, I'll move into the changes in fund balance. Again, our 10 main areas here. This past year we had revenues over expenditures in all but one. And so if you take a look at the general fund, we again had a net revenues over expenditures of $1,435,904. Again, we talked about what contributed to that larger amount this year. So at the end of the year, we had a fund balance of $11,483,729. Road and Bridge had a change of revenues over expenditures of $758,595. Some of that has to do with we had some projects that came in under bid, and the other portion of that just has to do with the timing of the payment. And so social services had.
So is there, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, is there a way that on that one, that we can get an annual summary of the projects that were over and under?
Sure, I can have Ann put something together for you.
Yeah, I think that would also be helpful as we prepare our 5-year plan, so we can see potentially what we can, if we had more revenues than expected, can we move up something else to get done with the funds, I guess is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Thank you.
Social services had revenues over expenditures of $561,625. Again, they varied last year from placements, out-of-home placements, from slowing down till picking up towards the second half of the year. But they did have that additional funds to their fund balance for a total of $7,991,329. The building fund. The building fund generally has to do with our jail project. Joe does utilize some of the funds for some of the work here at the courthouse, and so we had an increase of $36,028 with a fund balance, overall fund balance of $117,000. Public health had revenues over expenditures of $81,854. Their fund balance still shows a deficit, and I think that still has to do with our PERA adjustments. That again, it's a paper adjustment, but that we had to make changes about 2 years ago.
Well, excuse me, explain that with the PERA, you say?
Right, we had to fully fund that, and so we had to recognize that in our enterprise funds only, and so that threw our public health into a deficit fund balance situation.
Okay, you had to do it for all the departments, though, did you? Or?
Well, we just had to show it for public health. It's in our notes for PERA.
Okay.
Our solid waste department had revenues over expenditures of $918,842. with a fund balance of $15,779,648. It's important for the public to understand that, that's not just all these other ones are cash valuations. In this in solid waste, it's both cash valuations, but also property valuations. And so we don't have $15 million available to utilize in cash. The Family Service Center actually had expenses over revenues last year of $163,456. Their net fund balance is $2,333,337. That the deficit this year could be contributed to some construction costs that through Joe's department. The Juvenile Detention line, again, this addresses both the secure and the non-secure portion. They had revenues over expenditures of $3,612,993. Again, I would note that 2.5 of that would be based on the contribution that CAS provided. I think you'll probably be hearing a little bit more, but their secure facility had a very positive year as far as non-members went, and so that certainly had a positive impact on their bottom line. And so Juvenile Detention's fund balance, it would $5,400,462.
So would it be fair to say that where we have, so you put the whole 2.5 million from CAS into the 2019 revenue account?
Correct, that's where it had to go.
Yeah.
And the reason it shows oddly is because that comes in as a revenue, but all the construction expenditures, that gets put as an asset.
Right.
So it doesn't show up as.
Right, I get that part. So, so it would be safe to assume then if we subtracted 2.5 from the 3.6, that's getting close to the true revenues over
That would be the true
expenditures.
revenue. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Which I know we were projecting to be in very good shape this year. There's going to be a discussion of what we do with some of that. I think I've talked to you a little bit about that.
Right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Our internal service account had a revenues over expenditures of $422,000. Again, I think part of that is, if you recall, last year we pre-purchased vehicles for 2019 and 18, and so we actually incurred the costs the previous year, and so that is why we are looking at an increase or revenues over expenditures there. And then our debt services, again, this covers all of our highway, our law enforcement, and capital projects. We had revenues over expenditures of $1,092,062 with a fund balance of $2,921,252. So in summary, we had anticipated we received a total of $92,415,103 of revenue. We had total expenses of $83,658,163 for a fund balance adjustment of $7,997,964. Are there any questions?
So what does it look like? We have a good year, right?
We had a decent year, yep.
Okay.
All the departments did very well within their budgets, plus we got some additional revenues. So that helped out all the way around.
Very good.
And our salary increases will come out this next year then,
In
2020, yeah.
No, 2020, we budgeted for it for 2020.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yep.
but it doesn't show up on here is what I'm saying.
Right.
Oh, no, this is 19, yeah. This one, it should show up.
Yeah.
And in 2020, I just provided the document for the revenues and expenditures by departments again. I don't know that I have any, Lori and I reviewed this, there's not a whole lot to look at. I think from an estimation standpoint, through May 25th, we're right in that 40 to 41% of time through the year. If you look at our expenses on on the second page, we're at about 36% again, so I think that shows that, again, we're being cash conscious, budget conscious in our spending. We've had, of course, some savings from the COVID standpoint of not traveling, not having our fleet move, things like that. But we are under where we should be for this part of the year. From a revenue standpoint, that Lori just hasn't received funding there, so funding yet for this year, and so we don't have really any actual adjustment that we can show there. So, are there any questions at all about the 2020 budget?
Do we have any general bonds that are gonna become ending this year or anything of that?
Excuse me?
Are there gonna be any general bonds that are gonna end this year? Like, those were intended to go to the jail fund?
Right, I don't believe we have any ending this year. We had our capital improvement bonds complete, and then we had our state aid road bonds complete also previously. So they're all done.
Yeah, but the state aid road bonds that were completed, that, with that being gone, that's also was incorporated into our 5-year budget plan, that now instead of those dollars going to pay the bonds, they're going to future projects that we're doing.
Yep, going to actual road projects.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions then as far as budget?
I got one more question about the juvenile detention. It's listed in the 2020 as a 24-bed secure and a 12-bed non-secure. Is that going to change now as it's opening up?
Yeah, I can change that. I just neglected to change that for this.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Both
the
of them-
numbers actually are the new numbers then, right?
Both of them have doubled.
Yeah. So we're at 48 and 36 and
We
24?
should actually be at
66,
66.
and I think they have, right now they're licensed for 25.
Okay.
So, but there's some additional room.
Close to 100 then?
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
I know on here the motor vehicle revenues are at 23%. Is there any way to estimate what revenues were lost during this time?
We just have to look at past history and see what actually came in. Luckily, we were able to still do work with dealers,
Yeah.
and we actually had the tab drop off.
Yeah.
But, you know, until we can actually, I can take the revenues now and take a look and see where we're at and compare it to previous years, and then we'll know. But we lost 100% of our driver's license for the month of
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, I guess we'll go with the committee reports then, we've got everything covered. Kevin, you want to start us off today?
Sure. Let's see, on May 26th, we had a highway tracking committee meeting, and that was mostly in regards to an injury that had occurred with one of our employees, and we're working with OSHA, and I think maybe Steve can give some additional update on that in his report. On the 27th, we had a Prairie Lake Solid Waste meeting in the morning, and all is going well there. Again, that was done by teleconference, and all is going well there. The expenditures right now through the end of April was $626,000 over what was estimated, which in itself is not a good thing, but part of that is because of the one-time payments that we make for annual premiums and those types of things that fall early in the year. As of right now, they are still estimating that the expenditures may fall about $270,000 over budget. So we are having a budget meeting on June 19th to go over that and to see what, if anything, we might have to do to adjust the 2020 budget as well as prepare for the 2021 budget. We did also approve of a voluntary furlough policy for employees of that facility. That was worked out with the HR department from Otter Tail County. And so there were recommendations made, and we agreed to those. And those will that furlough policy will expire when the pandemic issue is deemed to be over. So in other words, if there was somebody who ended up with that COVID or had to take care of somebody with COVID, and they went beyond their time that they could be paid for, that they could still do a furlough without concern of loss of job or whatever. So that pretty much covers that one. That same day, we had a public outreach meeting for the Diversion Authority. There we went over a mitigation plan summary again that's dealing with acquisition of business properties, which would include farm business. I think we've talked about, and then that was the primary discussion there. And then after that, we went into the land management, and the same thing. The presentation was on the rural impact mitigation program. It was recommended that the Diversion Authority approve that, which they then did the following day at the Diversion Authority meeting. We got an update on where we stand with the biogeo monitoring program, the status report on that. That information is available on the Diversion Authority website if anybody's interested in seeing that process. Thursday morning, we had a solid waste advisory committee meeting, and we did hold that one at the law enforcement center. We had plenty of room in there for the social distancing that's required. We got an update from Matt Evans regarding the landfill cell construction update. And then there was a presentation by Kirk regarding Kirk and Steve, I guess, regarding the reopening policies of Clay County and how it impacts the landfill. I gave a report on the PERM update, and I did ask a few questions regarding. We've been under delivering our tons to PERM in Clay County, and that's of concern to me because as of right now, we're about 1,400 tons under delivered, and that goes back to including the previous year plus this year, and we're paying over $100 and some per ton, whether we delivered or not. And so it's important, so I brought up the importance of us trying to figure out why we have the under deliveries. I have received a report from Kirk regarding what some of it is, but I did suggest at our SWAC meeting that we need to really research that and see how we can improve and get caught up on that.
Well, the truck driver hired last week, that was for leachate though, going to farm.
Yeah, it was Frank, but so what it amounts to, each truck that goes to PERM probably delivers about 1,800 tons. And so, what we need to do to maintain our numbers would be two trucks a day, back and forth. If we do that, we would be able to reach our numbers. But keep in mind now that we need to do more than that because we have to make up. And then the problem becomes any more than 2 loads a day, we start getting into loads that PERM doesn't want because you start getting some of the things that the incinerator can't handle. And that's gonna always be a problem until we get the new transfer station up and running. Once the new transfer station is up and running, there'll be more room and more abilities to sort out the bad stuff that can't go to Perham. So that, there's gonna be some time delay in there, but we still need to, I still wanna see us try to improve on that deficit delivery. I just think that it's, when you look at the price per ton we're paying on what we actually deliver, it's extremely high. And we need to improve that. So we're gonna, and Kirk, and I know Steve Moore is doing everything he can from the city standpoint. So anyway, that'll be a work in progress that I'm kind of committed to. And they did talk about too that they've been turned away some. And so I'm gonna certainly be raising that on the 19th of June when we have our budget meeting, because I was told that because we were under-delivered, that we'd be the first one in line to be able to deliver more if they had the capacity to accept it. So we'll be working on that with.
And I think just to be fair and clear to our board is it's about 2 to 1 based on the data that Kirk has that they've been turned down versus it being an issue.
So if they're turned down, what, they bring the garbage back then?
Well, no, what they do is they'll call Clay County and say, we can't take any deliveries today. But they do that to everybody too. And so what happens, for example, when they have to shut down one of the burners, they only have so much room for storage. And so they tell you, you're gonna have to divert to some other place or hold it. And of course, we don't have room to hold anything other than take it to our landfill. So, and now with the new landfill, or with the new transfer station, I think that thing will be designed to hold up to 3 days worth of, which is significant. And it would be held inside. Okay, so then later that day, then we had the MCC JPA meeting. And again, at that meeting, we also then approved the Rural Impact Mitigation Program outline. We continue to still work with a couple of volunteer landowners on buyouts. So that's still we're still negotiating with them. And then we did approve a HDR land firm master services agreement, and then we had 2 task orders with SRF and ProSource. Those are 2 companies that actually do the negotiating. And what those task orders were, it was divvying up, all of the properties that are within the staging area, so that each of them would have certain numbers so that they can stay on top of it without getting too inundated. And then that same day, then we had the Diversion Authority meeting, and that was basically a recap of the outreach meeting, land management meeting, and the MCC JPA meetings.
Kevin, I have, over the last 6 to 12 months, had several questions from citizens on where can we purchase these buildings if they're able to move them or relocate barn buildings, whatever. And, I just kind of always either refer them to Steve or refer them to AE2S.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that there should be a one-stop shop to where people can go, either if it's on the diversion page. I'm not sure what's best.
No,
I think we should, as you are on that board, advocate for that, because there are buildings that could be utilized or moved.
Yeah, so Commissioner Mojo, I part of right now what I know of where they are acquiring those properties that might have buildings on them, on the Minnesota side so far, there has been nothing done in terms of whether they're auctioned off or whether I think right now, what's happening is we're just paying somebody to just keep them up and, you know, and that type of thing. For one thing, some of these properties might end up where the only need that we may have on some of the lands is the flowage easements. However, the buildings will have to go. So I agree with you, and I will research that and find out.
And I know that part of it, Brad and I bought a house from Moorhead and moved it, and then part of it is the cost that goes into it. So, you know, if you're deeming if it's a worthwhile move or not. But if you're only a matter of a mile or so from a property, it could be
Worthwhile.
affordable
Yeah,
to
yeah,
move.
yeah. I will certainly check that for you. Yep.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mojo, I have talked to Dean Vetter from AE2S, and that's his responsibility is to deal with those properties and buildings. And essentially what they do is they work with it's called a demolition list, which doesn't necessarily mean they're going to demolition everything. But as they accumulate the properties, they'll put it together. And Mr. Vetter indicated that if there's anybody that's interested, and I know you've reached out to him to provide that information, that name, that contact, and so they'll work with that citizen to work with whoever gets the contract for the demolition to try to work something out as it happens.
But that list isn't public, and that's.
Okay.
Right, and so the list will, he had indicated that the list for demolitions will come out sometime this fall, I believe.
Yeah.
And so.
So this works very similar to what we did as a county when we purchased these 2 blocks for our. What we did is we had one master agreement with somebody, and then if somebody had interest in any of it, they worked directly with who had that contract. So I think that's ultimately what we're going to be doing, but we'll.
And I guess that's what I'm
follow
saying. I don't want to micromanage that.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think there should be an area where a citizen can go look at a list, see, you know, what may be applicable, reach out to Eric Vetter or whoever and work with him.
Yeah, and we probably could even, Steve, maybe we could even talk about that before our next
Sure.
diversion meeting and see if we can't get a list provided and a timeline to deal with that, so. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. I had a lot going on last week.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On Wednesday, the 27th, I attended a virtual meeting of the Diversion Finance Committee. It was a long meeting with a long discussion regarding the difference in scrutiny, the level of scrutiny between property acquisitions going forward with the addition of Executive Director Paulson and his staff versus the previous methods that had been used, and it seems to be going well, and that was my report.
Okay, Jenny?
Thank you. Last week I attended the virtual meeting of the Buffalo Red River Watershed District 1 Watershed 1 Plan Advisory Committee. Good updates on where we've been. It is now ready for the 60-day comment period, and so the majority of that the committee recommended going forward with that, so that's now available. I believe the link to the plan is on the Watershed District website if you'd like to go there and offer comment. I also attended the Land Management Committee. Commissioner Campbell reported on that well. Lakes and Prairies meeting. We did the Executive Director review, or before that meeting we had done that, and then had good updates on where they're going in the new norm with COVID. Good news is they are continuing to have great feedback and involvement of Head Start families, and so they've met the need in terms of meeting clients at their level there. And yesterday had the law library meeting. We discussed decrease in revenues because of court cases, and we will review if there are any publications that we can cut because of that. So we will be meeting as a subcommittee on that. We also had discussion on the self-help clinic and when the county will move forward with not just having people come to the courthouse by appointment, so wanting to be in the loop on that. They had concerns. Also wanted to see if they could get a hold of the plexiglass dividers that we have in some of our offices for the law librarian down there. They had concerns with the self-help clinic when it is in operation. It's typically quite popular, 6 to 12 people waiting, and so I recommended we follow the same guidelines that we did at motor vehicle. People check in and then either wait in their cars until they receive a call. And then just kind of they had questions on what the county policy is for requiring face masks or anything going forward. But we had board elections, those positions will stay the same, and that concludes my reports.
Okay. Yeah, I failed to mention at the beginning of the meeting that Grant Weiland isn't here today. We could get a fishing report from him if we could call in from him, but I don't think he's going to call
I don't
in.
know if he has service.
I had highway tracking, which Kevin's already talked about that. That was last Tuesday. Wednesday had the Minnesota Rural County meeting. We had a long meeting there. That was also on virtual. Commissioner Chan Malcolm talked about the COVID-19 quite extensively, but that's all, whatever she covered has been pretty well covered already before in further discussions. Richard Tugg from University of Minnesota, who's a senior economist there, she gave an update sort of what's been happening around the state, you know, the 700,000 unemployment claims, you know, and she compared that to the Great Depression and where there was 50,000, you know, so it's a big increase in unemployment claims. Some of that's self-employed people can file now. That's caused some of that. Like Roseville County, she said they're 33% of unemployment. You know, there's a big unemployment up there. One of the big things that's happening with this unemployment is that the fact that they're losing their health insurance. You know, so that's a big problem with the people that are affected by the layoffs. And they also said that 46% of the people who are being laid off are 45 and over. So most of those cases, they've got families and stuff like that. It's really a hardship in some of those families. Dan Larson updated us on the legislative session and then the bonding bill, which again, they'll be taking up, I guess, next week sometime or the week. I think it's next week. Last night I went to the city of Felton along with Kirk and Shannon. They are discussing some recycling center that they want to start up there or get a new building built, and they put in but they put in what they plan on doing up there. We went up to discuss that to see if we can we had a few minor changes we anticipated, so we had a good discussion up there. We're going to have some further meetings with them. And those are my meetings. Steve?
Mr. Chair,
Steve.
this isn't part of my committee report, but I think it needs to be said is, you know, I think we're all very aware that there's a significant amount of unrest in the nation right now in Minnesota, and between COVID and the issues that we've observed in Minneapolis and Fargo. And I want to say that on our website, we all have our information, our cell phone numbers and email addresses. I encourage the public to reach out to your leaders and advocate things that you may want to talk about, or if you have ideas for us. We serve at the will of the people, and so I just really want to note that at every meeting we have a citizens to be heard. Because of the pandemic, you can, you know, if you don't want to come up in front of us, you can send something electronically so that we can have it. There are avenues for citizen input, and I want the public to know that. And you know, I think there are lots of good discussions that we can and should have, but we need to have citizens reach out to us to do that. I've always said it's really hard for me to advocate for issues if I don't know about those issues, and so I just really encourage the public to reach out to us so we can have those discussions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, last Tuesday, Commissioner Gross and Campbell have touched on it. We did have a highway tracking meeting in regards to an injury that took place this past fall. I think that we may be hearing more from Dave Overbo as he works through conversations with OSHA. On Wednesday, I met with Kathy McKay on a series of public health matters. I know that we had significant conversation at length last week in regards to what phases 2 and 3 may look like. We were hoping to get some input last week and moving forward. And so we had some discussions on what that could look like here for us at the county. Unfortunately, we have not received any guidance or direction to this point. That afternoon, I participated in a virtual meeting on the dispatch presentation for spatial needs assessment and of the Red River Regional Dispatch Center. This was a study that was conducted by Matrix Consulting Group. In addition to the different members of there, we also county administrators, city administrators, managers were invited to participate. It provided basically an oversight, the study provided an oversight of a 15-year view for both the staffing plan, the spatial needs based on specific standards. They talked about some different business or building options and what types of needs that we would need to have with those. There weren't any additional costs that were discussed with that. That was not the point of this study, but I'm sure we'll have more conversation on that in the future. On the 28th, we had a SWAC meeting which has been covered. I would note one of the things with the construction of our landfill, we're going to be seeing some heavy construction out on Highway 10, and Kirk is going to be working with Dave Overbo and MnDOT to have signage there to make people aware that we're going to have some pretty heavy machinery moving in and out of that area during the construction. On the 28th, I participated in the MCC JPA meeting that Commissioner Campbell has touched on very well. And this past weekend, I was in constant contact with Sheriff Empting in regards to the protests that were happening in Cass County. We completed the asphalt project on the southwest portion of the courthouse, and this past weekend, the courthouse parking was restriped. This morning, before board, I handed out you a letter. This past board meeting, you've requested a letter to be provided to Governor Walz and our legislators, and so you have a letter before you for your consideration to have sent to Governor Walz.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I reviewed the letter and I did mention before the meeting this morning to Steve that I'd like to see an extra sentence put in there about not only do the businesses have concern about losing their employees, but also the concern about if they don't get open pretty soon, they'll never get to open. I think that's important. That comes from them, from some of them, that they're really in a position right now financially. So I would like to just see a sentence to be added that reflects that in the message to the governor. So I guess I would ask that we incorporate that into the letter.
I think we should at least have the wording in there to say that our businesses should be on par with the businesses in Fargo across the river. They're restricted somewhat as well, but we should be similar to that.
I think this does. I think it does state that because it does talk about the same. They still are going to have to follow the same guidelines that are being open with the distancing and that, and Fargo is doing that too. So I think it does address it, Jim. But if you want to see it altered, that's fine with me.
No, that's.
But that's.
If you just add that in there, yeah.
Okay, if we're going to do that, make some additions on this one. I'd like everybody to sign that letter. So if Colleen can make those additions, if you're going to be available to sign that, I appreciate that.
Colleen, you're awesome.
Okay, anything for the head of the commissioner?
Can I read that?
Yeah, so on the second page here, that's, the sentence has been changed. If I could, I'll read it here. It
Yes.
says, "We would ask that you continue to establish safeguards to keep our citizens safe and move with urgency to help our citizens get back to work and allow businesses to fully open. Failure to allow business to fully open will result in business closures." And I think says it
Okay.
pretty good, so.
So I think there's room for everybody to sign that.
I would move that we sign the letter to the governor of Minnesota and copied to our local legislatures.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we got a motion by Kevin, second by Jim to send a letter to the governor concerning our concerns on business opening. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll get that done. Anything further? Brian, did you have anything to add today? You always have some good things to add.
No, I'm good today, thank you.
Okay. With that, we're adjourned.